I was 18 years old when I met my abuser. Within about 2 weeks, he had convinced me to move in with him, which it took me about a couple months to actually move in with him. But when I first met him, I was kind of in a whirlwind, and I thought he was my soulmate. So I thought the natural progression would be to move in with him and start this life together that we were supposed to be having. So I naturally agreed to move in with him, thinking that this was the plan. So I moved in with him, and we decided to get married. And really, up until this point, everything had been pretty good. I mean, I can't look back and say it was horrible, because we had a great time, and I really thought this was my soulmate. But then when we got married, it's like we woke up after the wedding and he was somebody else. It wasn't anything obvious at first. It was a lot of subtle things at first, like comments or sneered remarks or jokes that usually we would just laugh off, but then those would turn into like deeper cuts and more humiliating statements, and started becoming more public. Well, when it started becoming more of a public humiliation, I started to say something about it, and that's when he thought it would be best if we started spending more time together in solitude, as far as not talking to other people about what was going on, or really spending any outside time with anyone, just because it was easier to stay home and not have me complain about what he's saying, and really he could say what he want and have no one complaining about what he's saying. So it kind of worked out well for him. So we kind of tapered out some of our friends because we just didn't at that time want anyone involved too much. At the time, I thought it was a we decision. Looking back, I know now it wasn't a we decision, because that decision turned into not talking to my family, which obviously that is not the right choice, to stop talking to friends or family. But at the time, I really was convinced that that was the best thing for our marriage. Well, I started to spiral even further, and so he decided that what we needed was a baby. So having a baby meant I needed to quit my job, and we were going to have a baby. And so we did. We bought a house, had a baby, quit my job. But after the baby was born, I noticed that like certain expectations were being put down and chore lists. Since I was a stay-at-home mom now, then that was my responsibility. That was my job. And not that he was paying me for it, because I was his wife. It was my responsibility. And as her mother, it was my duty. So that became into chores like, have the dinner on the table by 6, and all the sheets need to be washed every day, and you need to wipe the walls once a week, and just really trivial things. And if I didn't have them done, then the verbal attacks became really bad. And then he would start taking privileges away. After I had my daughter, that was the first time I tried to leave. So when he would leave in the morning to go to work, he would take the extra set of keys and the garage door opener to make sure that we wouldn't go anywhere. That was about when sexual abuse started happening. That is when I realized that I wasn't really coherent some days when I woke up, and I couldn't really figure out why, but I found out I was pregnant. Well, one night I had rolled over in the bed and took too many covers with me, so he woke up and flung the covers off the bed and kicked me in my back, and I fell on the floor, and I started miscarrying. But I was still noticing these foggy days, and I was starting to have blurred memory. I couldn't really piece my days together, and I wound up pregnant again. And again, I couldn't figure out how I was getting pregnant. When I had gone to the doctor the first time for the miscarriage, they had told me at that point in time that it looked like I had been a little too sexually active, which I didn't really know what that meant, but some of the things that come back had given an impression that there was some damage done, but I couldn't tell you how that happened. But one morning I woke up and I was really groggy and I was thirsty, so I went to the bathroom, and on the bathroom counter there's a medicine bottle with the label torn off, and the lid was off of it, and I went to go look at it, and inside of it were all these different pills. And as soon as I picked that bottle up and those pills shook in the bottle, made that rattle sound, it was like he must have put on a superhero cape, because he was next to me all of a sudden. And he grabbed it out of my hand. He's like, "You don't need to worry about that." And I never saw that again. But shortly after, I found out I was pregnant. The physical abuse was still going on. Obviously, the spiritual, the emotional, the verbal, all of it was really still going on, but the physical was starting to get fairly bad. And I almost miscarried my third pregnancy, and went on bed rest because I was losing that baby. He came home with all these boxes, and he said, pack all your stuff up, we're leaving. And I said, okay. So he took us out to the middle of nowhere, halfway across the U.S., into this abandoned house. So the only way I could get to my doctor, which I was having to go once a week at that point, was to ride the community bus. I proceeded to have my son there, and I noticed my son was kind of sick. And at first I was like, oh, he just, probably has a cold. And he just kept getting more and more sick and more and more sick. And I didn't have anyone to tell. And my husband was like, we'd, already decided years ago that we didn't go to the doctor. I just kept trying to take care of my kids. And my son got sick to the point where I couldn't get him to wake up. And like something clicked in my head. I was like, we're going to die here. If I don't get out of this house right now, we're going to die, and my son's going to be the first one to go. So in some way, I scooped him up and scooped my daughter up and somehow got the keys, because this was on a weekend, so my husband was home. Somehow got the keys and got to the car and got to the hospital. I can't tell you how to this day, because it's I just feel like I was zoned. Got to the hospital, realized that while they're, doing their test with my son, there's a phone there. And I see this phone on the wall, and I get another epiphany, and I'm like, I can call and tell somebody. So I did. I called my mom and I told her, I was like, I can't really talk about all of it right now. I said, but it's not good. So my family came out and saw firsthand what was going on, offered to help me move, which we did. He had turned into this caregiver all of a sudden, where he wanted to help take care of our son. And I needed help. So we moved back in together. My son winds up being in the hospital for quite a while. Till he gets better. And during this time, my husband is very attentive to my son and wanting to take care of him. So I'm thinking things are going to change and they're going to get better. And then as we start kind of progressing out of that, the physical abuse started being not only towards me, but it started towards my daughter, because she would get in between our fights. And so she would get caught in the middle of crossfire and she would get hurt. And when she started being old enough to talk back to him about that, all of a sudden all three of us were starting to become injured at some point in time. And so I hit that point where I was like, this isn't right. The three of us keep getting hurt. We got to get out of here. On the radio, I heard this ad, and it asked a handful of questions. And it said, if you answered yes to any of these questions, then you should call this number and talk to somebody. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've answered yes to all these questions. So I found a phone again and I called, and it wound up being an advocate at the Family Justice Center. And that was the first time, I think that might have been the first time I ever heard the word domestic violence or victim of abuse. And she had said, you need to get help. This is where you need to go. She told me to go down to the Family Justice Center. And she's like, all you have to do is go in there and tell them you need to talk to somebody. So, I figured out a way to kind of sneak away to do that, and got to the Family Justice Center and spent pretty much a whole afternoon here. But I never had to leave the couch. I just stayed on the couch. I remember staying on the couch and telling 10 years of my story and crying to these individuals who took care of the paperwork for me, so I didn't have to worry about that. But they were able to, by that day, get me and my kids into a safe place and file for an order of protection, and got me in contact with a support group, and got me in contact with legal aid, and got me in contact with child services, and all these different things that I was going to need that I didn't even realize I needed, because I was just like, I want to get out of here. But they took care of all that for me, and I was just able to just kind of go, this is what's happening. And they were able to say, we got you.